Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Amelia wash processed Panama from Kabuki Coffee. There's the bag right there. And Kabuki, based out of Paris, France. And this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having previously reviewed the Amerlia, a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. And in that review, I mentioned that we did pick up two higher end offerings from this coffee roaster, with this being the first of those two, as it is a Lerida Estate Gesha. And I was actually very interested in picking this coffee up, largely due to the fact that we did not review a single Lerida coffee in 2024. I actually really like the folks over at the Lerida Estate, as I had the fortune of meeting them at SCA Japan in 2023. We had a pretty extensive conversation about their SL34 coffee, but a slight conversation about their Geshas as well. So I did want to feature at least one of them this year. So that coffee caught my interest, and we will see how it turned out, as this right here is day 50. And this one is a 100 gram bag, so this will be a slightly shorter review, but the recipe we went with for this coffee was the same recipe that we went with for the other Kabuki coffee, which was a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius, about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And I also like this one best through the Chemex, which does indicate a more medium grind roast profile for this coffee. And in that previous review, I mentioned that they are inspired by another Parisian-based coffee roaster in substance. And this one was a little bit lighter than that Amerlia, as it didn't have a bit of those same robust qualities that coffee did. Even then, it's not necessarily quite as on par with some of the ultra-light roasted coffee roasters we have had in the past, but it does definitely skew a little bit more in that direction for this coffee. So I would still say that this one is very light by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 23, first impression, and we ran it through the V60, and the coffee was reminiscent of other Lerida Geshas we've had in the past, as there's a slight herbal quality to go with the floral tone to it, and that's a little bit of the conversation I did have with the people at the Lerida Estate. It's that their Gesha is just a little bit different, because it does have that slightly different herbal quality to it compared to a lot of other Geshas, which we both found to be a little bit distinct within their coffees. Outside of that, white floral forward with a mild level of sweetness and citrus, so it was overall just a nice start, very clean, a lot of what I was expecting from this coffee. Day 26 through the Chemex, and the coffee is offering a nice level of intensity for the combination of a lighter Panamanian Gesha brewed with a Chemex, as it has an interesting, we'll describe it as unsalted cracker taste to it, as it's very clean and floral, but there is a very slight bready quality, and that's the best descriptor I could come up with, as it did remind me of a saltine, but not like an overly salted saltine. Citric qualities are also present, so I certainly felt like some adjustments were needed with this coffee. We move on to day 29, as we opted for the April brewer, and the coffee is significantly improved today, as it's offering a nice combination of sweetness, clarity, intensity, and a better defined fruit quality. In addition to that, there is a slight sugar cookie sweetness, as well as a well-presented jasmine-like florality, so much better. This time I'm getting a lot more of the notes that they had listed on here for this coffee, so it was certainly improving from this moment. Move on to day 32, as we opted for the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments. And I already mentioned in the Amerlia review that in hindsight, I probably should have gone the other direction with these coffees. Given that they're super light, I felt, okay, well, we'll keep pushing these coffees and maybe get a little bit more out of them. And it still had the same issue. And it was kind of interesting that with the V60 higher extraction adjustments on the Amerlia, I had some issues. And that was kind of the same case with this one, as it had even more of that slightly saltine-like taste to it before it did transition into a better, more citric and floral-like experience. Bergamot was a bit more prominent this time, but it was also presented in a subtle sense, so I said probably not the direction to go, but since we already went that direction, we decided to go the other direction on day 35 with the Chemex lower extraction adjustments. This is really when I got the idea that it probably is going to be better if we continue to go along those lines with these coffees. And that certainly helped, as the coffee is the best it had been to this point, as there is still that slight cracker-like feel to it, but there's also, actually, it says slightly cracker-like feel is gone in place of a better sweetness and florality. So at this moment, it was actually completely gone, mostly in line with the listed jasmine. There is a vanilla sugar cookie feel to it, but it still does remain mostly delicate. That being said, I really appreciated the definition to a lot of the qualities within this coffee this time. So on day 38, we tried it one more time with the Chemex slower extraction adjustments, and it was the best it had been. Very clean and delicate base with the sweetness coming in a very interesting vanilla cookie, and I would even say marshmallow-like sense, which interestingly enough is something that I've also experienced from other Lorita Geshas that I've received samples of in the past. It's a very white experience, especially within the florality as well. Additionally, a slight bit of an Earl Grey and lemongrass-like feel with a moderately low level of brightness to it, relatively speaking. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that one real quick, and that is the cleanliness level 5. And I'm very happy that it did score that level 5 because it's not always a given that a Panamanian Gesha is going to score level 5. But this coffee was very delicate, and I did find that it had a very nice defined profile to it. So I felt like the level 5 was definitely justified in that. We move on to the level 4s, and we have 2 of them. Florality level 4, and if I recall correctly, I think that they have some floral note along the lines of jasmine listed on here, and while I can see that it's a very white floral experience, I was getting a little bit more of that vanilla-like quality to it for the majority of the time as well, so I could definitely see that also aligning with the floral qualities in this coffee. In addition to that, the citric qualities are at that level 4, and bergamot I know was a note that they had listed on here. And given that the base of this coffee is so delicate and tame, a lot of the qualities that did stick out were going to score higher, most predominantly that citric quality, as it definitely had a fair bit of that throughout. We move on, we have a couple of level 3s. We'll start with the berry fruit level 3. If I recall correctly, I think that this one also had a tropical berry aspect to it, but I mentioned that this coffee was also presented in a slightly more subtle and tame sense, so that will score a lot of these qualities higher than they would otherwise. Then in addition to that, we have the savoriness level 3. I mentioned that there is a bit of that tea-like quality to it, most notably that slight Earl Grey feel, which did give it a little bit of a savory quality to it. And as I'm looking at the notes in the background, I recall that, yeah, there is a lemongrass feel to go with that citric fruit quality as well. That's predominantly what's scoring there at that level 4. And then last thing worth discussing, actually we have a handful of things still worth discussing. Finish level 3. I think that was a pretty interesting one, as this coffee was maybe a little bit more delicate in times than I might have expected going into it, given that it didn't necessarily offer the longest lasting finish to it. It was a very nice finish. At times it had some really interesting sweetness to it, but it didn't really go any higher than that level 3. Same thing with the sweetness level 3. But I could definitely say that improved with time and adjustments, as by the end it was a little closer to the level 4 than it had been on some of the earlier days, but even then I don't necessarily think I could justify it. I think that the profile of this one was still meant to be a little bit more delicate. Acidity level 3, that's kind of interesting. I did comment on the final day that we were in between a 2 and a 3 in terms of the brightness of this coffee. So it is worth noting that this one wasn't necessarily the brightest, which again goes to show how kind of interesting the Aricha was scoring scoring at that level 4 mark. And then last thing worth discussing now, body level 1. Very light-bodied cup of coffee. I feel like the combination of factors on this one, washed Panamanian Gesha with a Chemex, was always going to skew a little bit more in that direction. So very tea-like in that sense. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I would say that it was on the better side of things. What was tricky about this coffee is there were certain times I was brewing it and I was a little concerned that this coffee was going to end up being something I didn't like. As I kind of mentioned, there were certain days where it had that slightly more bready quality to it, which did lead into that saltine cracker-like description. That being said, some adjustments were able to lower that or just get rid of it altogether, and as a result, a lot of the sweetness that was presented, while delicate at times, was very enjoyable. In addition to that, it did score very high on the cleanliness, and I don't think it's possible for me to dislike a coffee that scores a level 5 in terms of cleanliness, so it definitely had that going for it. If anything, I just maybe wish there was a little bit more sweetness to it, and that probably would have helped the overall experience on it, and also a little bit longer and more lasting of a finish. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This one is a classic Panamanian Gesha feel. I mean, it's delicate, it's got a lot of depth to it, it offers a lot of those citric qualities and floral qualities to it in a very clean sense. So that with that lighter profile, and I know that's a little bit generic, but if there's anything that does stand out from this coffee, it's that it does feel a little different in terms of the Lorita Gesha coffees. If you've had Lorita Gesha coffees in the past and they have a little bit different of that floral-like feel to them, then that might be a pretty good indicator of how this coffee just differs generally from your average wash process Panamanian Gesha. kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Amelia Wash Process Panama from Kabuki Coffee. Thank you for watching.